Hello, everyone. I'm Pamela Marshall at the Wellness Radio TV and at the Wellness Radio TV podcast. I am truly honored to have as my guest today a man who can speak firsthand to the challenges that many families are facing, many military veterans are facing with the stigma of mental illness, whatever category it falls under, and the high suicide rate. My guest today is Major General Gregg Martin. He is an Army Major General, a West Point grad. He's retired. And Major Martin, you could be enjoying your time on the beach, but you have taken up this mantle and the importance of stopping the stigma of mental illness when it comes to the men and women who've served this country. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And then let me just thank you for your service to our country and your leadership, the leadership that you showed as a high school athlete, as a college man at West Point, and then in the military, in the Army. Thank you for that leadership, and you retired, and you keep on doing it. Can you tell me why?
It's my mission. It's my purpose in life. I had a great career in the Army and loved it. And I was serving a cause greater than myself. And I was, really fired up and motivated and driven to serve in the Army, serve our country. And then I went into bipolar crisis. The onset of bipolar hit me in the Iraq War. The thrill and the stress of intense combat basically triggered my genetic predisposition. So I went for over a decade with unknown, unrecognized, undiagnosed bipolar disorder, but it finally caught up to me and I went into full blown mania, was removed from my position, had to retire from the Army. And then at that point, I went into what I call bipolar hell. It was horrible with severe depression and psychosis. And so it took me about 2 years to work through the hell that I was in, to include passive suicidal ideations, wishing I was dead, and having no drive, no energy, no ambition. And I finally pulled through it with the miracle of lithium, a really good medication for bipolar. And once I started 6 years ago, my journey to recovery, I said, I have to tell my story. I have to share it with other people because I might be able to help them. If I relate my experience, what I went through, what it was like, and then how I started to recover, and then how I rebuilt my life and entered a new life. And so it just basically became my personal life mission, to share my bipolar story, to help stop the stigma and save lives. And the way I really do it is I write. I'm writing a book. I've written about 20 published articles in the last 2 years. I've given dozens and dozens of presentations and talks. And so I'm telling my story. And in so doing, people, they connect with me. We talk, we just network, and we continue to work on this as interested people. So I still have a lot of fun. I live in Cocoa Beach. I mean, I go to the gym, I go to the beach, I'm in dancing classes. I've got some wonderful friends. So believe me, my life is not all work, although I do work pretty hard at the mental health stuff.
Yeah, my guest today is retired Major General Gregg Martin, and your journey through dealing with mental illness. What do you think could have happened that would have shortened the amount of time, or even helped you to deal with the stress of? You said this happened during Desert Storm,
It was the actually the Iraq War. So
the Iraq War. So what happens in the military when their soldiers are experiencing these kinds of illnesses in the military? Is it just let's discharge them and then good luck?
well, the first thing that has to happen is people have to realize that there's something going on mentally.
Hmm.
So in my case, even though the bipolar hit me in 2003, It was a high performing mania. So bipolar can really help you and boost you and enhance your natural talents until it goes too far. So for several years, I performed better as a result of having bipolar disorder. I
Hmm.
had more energy, more drive, more creativity, more focus. I didn't need as much sleep. But the problem is, as the mania goes up, your judgment, your behavior, your decision making, all that sort of thing starts to go down. But in my case, nobody around me was trained in what bipolar disorder or what mental illness looks like. And so that's the first thing that has to happen is people have to be more aware of what it is and what it looks like so that they can talk to the person who's got a mental condition and hopefully get them in to see a professional medical help.
Yeah, well, Dr. Martin, not Dr. Martin, General Martin.
I'm actually a doctor too. I have a
Y-
PhD.
Okay, well, Dr. Martin, we'll go with that. So you say people recognizing. We know more about how to recognize dog food than we know how to recognize mental illness. Where, who's supposed to be teaching us about recognizing that we have a high performing person who is on the brink of something else? How do we know that as family members? What are we supposed to be looking for?
Well, our society and our culture and even corporations and definitely the military, we spend a lot of time and a lot of money on physical health, physical fitness, physical well-being, with exercise and sleep and diet and all that. And that's great. I mean, I think we need to keep doing that. But we should spend at least as much time on educating people about mental health. What is good mental health? How does a person enhance their mental well-being? What are the symptoms of the most common mental illnesses? How do you have the uncomfortable talk with someone that you think is, you know going off the tracks with some sort of mental condition? How do you refer them, get them to go see a mental health professional? um, I think we need to spend the same amount of time on mental health as we do on physical health. Because when you think about it, the brain is it's really the source of everything. The brain is the most important organ for everything we do as human beings. So that I think is the first thing. We need a big shift to really elevate the priority and the importance of mental health.
Yeah, and I've often said that there ought to be a workshop at every family reunion
Right.
because I saw a magazine, Time magazine, had a whole issue dedicated to the brain from conception to the illnesses that are associated with aging and everything in between. And so many times, as you speak about the military, many times mental illness doesn't show up until around the age that people are joining the military. So you would think that the military would have a robust program in place.
Well, the military, first of all, if you go back to before 9/11, so 21 years ago, we were way behind where we are now. So, over the last 20 years, the military in general has really improved and enhanced its training, its awareness, its treatment, the availability of treatment, how to deal with mental health so that they don't just automatically separate people. Each one is handled on a case by case basis. We've really come a long, long way, but for the military, it needs to start, in basic training, in the basic officer courses, and then it needs to continue progressively throughout a person's career so that they get smarter on these issues. As far as the civilian world, and I think that the business world, the corporate world needs to do, the same sort of thing. And we really need to start in elementary school teaching kids about and their teachers about mental health. The same way we do, I mean, there's courses in health and fitness in, going all the way through the different grades of school. In fact, a friend of mine who, we became friends and colleagues because of the work I was doing. She's an educator, a health and science teacher up in Buffalo, New York. She put together a course to educate the educators at all different levels. It's an online course, but specifically focused on bipolar disorder, and it's gotten rave reviews up in the Buffalo area. So she's got now a network of teachers who have taken her course, who really understand bipolar disorder, all about it, and
Hmm.
now take that back into their schools and their classrooms, and then they'll really stand out kind of as a bright light, and other people will want to learn as well. And then it can expand beyond bipolar disorder and include, depression and suicidality and PTSD and other things. So that's what I think. We need to upgrade the importance and then start educating people about the different facets and elements of dealing with it.
Thank you all, everyone who's joining us either on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. We really appreciate you watching and hope that you will share and like, because this is a critical topic. I don't know one family that's not impacted by this. And as you mentioned, suicide and the fact that at least 20 veterans will die today as a result of suicide. So, with that kind of number, we're losing veterans at a wartime rate at the hands of suicide. Then we have so many veterans who have mental illnesses that are incarcerated, that prison systems now have people who are hired to handle the caseload of veterans that are incarcerated. Doctor, Major General Gregg Martin, are we failing the men and women who put their lives on the line to protect this country?
Yes, I think we are, because we know what a huge problem it is. Um, we have, in my time in the Army, we went from very, very little emphasis, training, attention on mental health, and then it started to grow after 9/11. And the reason it began to grow after 9/11 is because the suicides were increasing, the levels of depression, bipolar, PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, um, survivor's guilt, moral injury, all these mental conditions were just escalating during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So the military, all the services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, they put increasing emphasis, and they have improved, but the numbers keep going up. It's not getting better. The suicide rates continue to rise. In fact, I just recently saw a statistic, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but we've had significantly more service members die by suicide than have died in combat
Wow.
in the wars. I mean, it's way more. I wish I knew the exact number, but it's, if you look it up, if you just Google it, it's incredible how many more people have died by suicide. And then when you add in the veteran population, which you mentioned, it's averaging 22 veterans per day are dying by suicide. So we're doing a lot. The military and the VA are working hard at this problem, but we're not solving the problem. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. So we need to, I think, keep pushing forward in the good initiatives and the things that we think are working well. But then we need to try new approaches. We need to do better at training and educating and counseling people who, regarding mental health. We need to make sure there's adequate providers down, where the boots on the ground, where the rubber meets the road. We need to have therapists and counselors and psychiatrists who are available. And then we have to really dampen and eliminate the stigma that deters people from going and getting help. It even deters the battle buddy from encouraging someone to get help, because the battle buddy is afraid that if they try to get their friend in to get mental health care, it'll ruin their career. And so
Mm.
there's all these kind of conundrums out there. And a lot of it is the stigma and the lack of education.
You talked about the number of veterans who committed suicide, and I did just what you said, Googled it. In the 20 years since September 11th, four times as many deaths among members of the military have been caused by suicide compared to those killed in action. That hurts me, sends chills. We talk about war and we don't want any war, but there are people who are having internal wars. And this, that we have had four times as many deaths because of suicide as was caused in action, this is this is insane. It's crazy.
It is. It is absolutely insane. And there have been some very good studies that the military has done. And, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, when he came in, to his credit, he initiated a very broad, um, deep analytical study of what's going on with suicide. Why do we have all these suicides? What's happening? What are the factors? What are the root causes, et cetera? And he brought in some of the best minds, in the world, academia, science, government, business, and so I'm looking forward to reading the report to Secretary Austin, and then knowing him and the kind of warrior he is. I mean, I think he will put some very good, strong policies in place to try to get a handle on this.
And then those that end up incarcerated because of mental illness, those who end up homeless because of mental illness. And I think that in this country, we're so comfortable saying we have to take care of the homeless population. Well, I submit to you today, we don't have a homeless problem. We have a mental health problem because the majority of the people who are homeless have mental illnesses. And while we close down those facilities where mental health patients could be committed, and we're incarcerating them to the tune of $40,000 to $60,000 a year because they're labeled as criminals, when we would not pay that to get them the mental health care that they need. What is wrong with us? Except I think there's such a huge lack of understanding. Most people don't realize how many people are in jail. Most of the medication that's handed out in prisons is for mental illness.
Right.
And so you're watching this, you know what you've gone through. What advice do you have to for families?
That's a wonderful question. I had bipolar disorder, and it was rising. My manic highs were getting higher. My depressive lows were getting lower for at least 11 years, from 2003 to 2014. And it wasn't until the very end, when I went into what they call full blown mania, where I literally was over the top, off the tracks, in a state of madness. And my 4-star boss had to remove me from my command position. And I'm glad he did, because it probably saved my marriage and it probably saved my life. And he ordered me to get a mental health evaluation. But my wife, who, we've been together since early 20s, she didn't she saw weird behavior from time to time, but she couldn't pull it together into a pattern of mental illness.
So what was she identifying as weird behavior? Because I think that's key. What is weird and then what is mental illness, and when should weird trigger us into action as family members, or even noticing things about ourselves?
Okay, so I'll go back a little in time, and I don't want to talk too long on this, but um, first signs, looking back now for her, the first signs of mania were, when I was a battalion commander. My change of command came, and I hadn't finished my administrative paperwork, kind of wrapping things up.
Uh-huh.
So I had to take boxes of paperwork and go live in the BOQ, Bachelor Officers Quarter, and I had to have people shuffling stuff back and forth from the office to me. I missed the move with my wife. She did everything. I missed the drive cross country because I didn't do the work. She said, that is so weird. I started increasingly being overly enthusiastic, overly excited and energetic, where I started doing, little skits. Like I would, in front of the battalion formation, 500 guys, I would, rip off my shirt, and I'd have like a big, we were the 5th engineers, and I'd have a big 5 painted on my chest. And I'd grab a hatchet, and I'd jump around like an ape, yelling and whooping and hollering. But in the Army culture, that was seen as motivated. Then I started drinking more. And what the drinking was is, as you go into mania, you have, at least I did, and many people who are bipolar have an increased desire to consume alcohol because it feels so good. But the more you consume alcohol, the more manic you get. So I started drinking more and more and more as a self-medication. Um, we had a guy die. He was in a plane crash. And so I wanted to he was in my unit, and I wanted to put together a nice memorial for him. And so we did a really nice memorial. People spoke, they came over, and it was really, really lovely for him and his wife, both killed. But I wasn't happy with one day of mourning and memorialization. I did a second day, and then a third day, and then a fourth day, and then a fifth day, and then a sixth day. She's like, what are you doing? This is insane. Are you going to keep having a memorial service like every day, like for the rest of your life? I mean, she just thought it was so weird. I started talking more and more and more and faster and faster. I became overly confident. What they call it is grandiosity. I thought I was on a mission from God. Um, I, I got extremely religious. I started doing between 20 and 30 religious events per week, to include going to about 4 or 5 different churches on Sundays. I mean, just Bible study, speaking in tongues, visioning the Holy Spirit. Thought I was an apostle appointed by God in the U.S. military. Um, I went to my son's college graduation, and instead of driving like a normal person, I rode my bike across a good chunk of Washington, D.C., showed up soaked in sweat, never sat down, jumped around, hooting and hollering, doing chest bumps with the new graduates, dancing in the aisles. I started going on midnight bike rides in Washington, D.C., and where I would just go as fast as I could through the streets of D.C., at 1, 2 in the morning. And I would hallucinate that I would lift up off the ground and I was flying over the city, over and between the big monuments. Um, at work, I started going into classrooms and lecture halls and just like interrupting the professor or the speaker and just taking over and start, lecturing about, this cosmic vision I had for how I could make the world more safe and secure. So, I mean, those are just a few ideas, but it goes. I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of examples that are just out of control. And then in depression, the depression, which really didn't, I was mostly manic until I told you when I got removed from the job. But the depression, suddenly I went from enthusiastic and extroverted to withdrawn, confused, no energy, no interest in anything, no enjoyment, hopeless, thinking about death all the time. The best part of the day was when I got to go to sleep at night, and I would pray that I wouldn't wake up in the morning. Um,
Mm.
it was brutal. And so those are just some of the symptoms that affected me with bipolar.
And so, what was when we talk about what family members can do, what was your wife doing? Or let me ask this: what should families be doing when and if they see something like this?
I asked Maggie, and she wrote a piece for the book. It's really, really good. It's just about a couple pages long, but she says, I was like the proverbial frog in a pot of water, that the temperature kept rising little by little, and it was such small incremental changes over the years. I didn't feel the heat. I didn't feel it until the pot boiled over and I was a
Mm.
boiled frog. And, until I went into full blown mania in 2014, she didn't realize it. After the events of full blown mania and some of the things I described, then she said, "Whoa, there's something wrong," and I was ordered to go get a psych evaluation, by my boss, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, by the way, and she
Mhm.
came with me to the appointment and pitched in and gave some information. But at that point, she really knew something was wrong, even though the doctors misdiagnosed me 3 times and said, "You're perfectly healthy. There's nothing wrong with you. You're fit for duty," to use the military term. Um, but she knew there was something really wrong. And so she kept a closer eye on me. What would have helped her significantly was if she had the benefit of the things I talked about earlier. If she, just as an Army family member, had had the benefit of some basic training and education on what are the symptoms of the common mental health disorders, what do they look like, what are the symptoms of bipolar or depression. If she
Yeah.
just known those basics, I think she would have recognized it in me years earlier.
Yeah. Major General Martin, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for the work that you're doing because we don't have enough education about this problem that is touching the lives, taking the lives of so many people, military and not military. Um, just even so we have the group of people that you're advocating for are veterans because that's where you've been, and so you have the trauma of war, but it's also said that 55% of women in the military experience sexual trauma. 38% of men in the military experience sexual trauma. In this place of the military where they have raised their right hand and committed to serve the country and honor the cloth that they wear in their uniforms, yet there's no protection within that for them. And then they got to go fight, they got to go and protect this country.
It is a horrible crime, just, you know, uh, person to person. It's a heinous crime. I mean, it's absolutely awful and it should not happen. But it's doubly awesome when you think about the military. The code of loyalty and brotherhood and sisterhood, and that we respect and treat everybody with dignity, and we're all on a team, and we take care of each other.
Mhm.
It makes sexual assault that much worse because it's not only a violation of law and just interpersonal human behavior, it's a violation of the whole ethic of serving in the US military.
Um, so, of course, my son is a Navy veteran, and I don't know what all he's gone through because many times you all don't talk about it, and that's one of the challenges as well. The shame that people have as a result of things that have happened to him. I don't know if anything did, um, but dealing with the shame, dealing with the stress of you are when you raise your right hand. It's one thing for me to go to Walmart and there's a shooting, because that could happen any day. But I don't know that we have an appreciation for the fact that when you raise your right hand and say that I am going to defend and protect this country, you're saying I'm willing to die. So there's a process that you go through mentally to accept that willingness to die. And then all of these other things happen to you while you're there. And then you get out of the military, and it's as if we're throwing these men and women away. And I want to know, what can we do as military families? What can people do to support what you're doing, because you're working very hard to educate people, to help people understand that there should not be a stigma if you have some challenges mentally, um, to help hold our elected officials accountable, to help make sure that agencies that are receiving funding to help the men and women who serve this country are actually doing what they get the money to do. What can we do? What can our listeners do?
I think being informed and interested is probably step number one. And when you become informed and interested and you start getting even the basic level of education about mental health, the first thing that you're going to understand is that mental health or mental illness or a mental condition, they are real. They're not because of the person is a bad person or a lack of character or a lack of willpower. They're physiologically real, where the internal workings of the brain and the brain's wiring and circuitry are, they're misfiring. They're not connecting quite right. you know, uh, like with bipolar disorder, when you go into mania, you have an overproduction of certain brain chemicals that drive you into mania. And then alternatively, you have an underproduction that drive you down into depression. And so people need to know that mental illness, mental health issues are just as real physically as cancer, diabetes, heart disease. And so, there's no stigma for those, health conditions. So neither should there be for mental health. But it's interesting if a good way to look at it, if you go back 50 years to the 1970s, breast cancer was stigmatized. It was
Mhm.
shameful. People didn't talk about it. They were embarrassed about it. And then Betty Ford, the first lady, came down with breast cancer, and she said, "Hey, I have breast cancer, and here's the facts, and here's what I'm doing about it." And she broke the ice. And so, over the past 50 years, now breast cancer survivors are seen as heroic figures, courageous figures, fighting for their life, admired. And I mean, all the pro teams wear pink shoes and pink ribbons and pink shirts. And I think that's wonderful,
Yeah.
as it should be. But I think we should start looking at people battling mental health conditions the same way. We have made progress. I think there's a lot of better understanding and empathy and support for people with PTSD. The Vietnam generation really, put PTSD on the map,
Hmm.
much bigger understanding and empathy and support. But we need to do the same for the other conditions like bipolar and depression. In traumatic brain injury now is getting a lot of positive support, mainly because of this linkage between the military and the National Football League. Because when the NFL gets involved with pro sports, people pay more attention, and when they start seeing their favorite superstar football players coming down with traumatic brain injury and dying an early death, it makes people pay attention. So I think, again, the way to stop the stigma is first and foremost through education and training.
Right. I've often said we would be rushing to help somebody if they were holding their eyeball,
Right.
but we don't rush to help people when we see that they're having the attack on the most powerful tool that they have is the mind. Because
Mhm.
you can have 20/20 vision and your mind is gone and you still cannot function in society. You can have one eye and a good mind and you're going to be okay.
Right.
I'm not minimizing not having an eye. But when the mind is gone, and I thank you for stopping in the middle of your day, in the middle of your week, to be on At the Wellness Network in Gainesville, Tennessee, and you are a major general and you are attacking this issue on a major national level, working with senators to help change legislation, and you have time to talk to us today. I'm honored. And I will say that in your efforts to help educate and to prevent, we're going to miss out on the 20 who take their lives today. That breaks my heart because I have a son who's a military veteran who suffers from mental illness. How can we put this on the fast track because we are losing Americans every day. And as I mentioned before, since 9/11, we've lost four times as many veterans to suicide than we have in combat. How do we put this on the fast? This ought to be right up there with COVID.
Absolutely. You know, the estimates are that about 1 in 4, so about 25% of people on the planet are afflicted with some sort of mental health condition. So 1 in 4. And that means that everybody else, the rest of the population, are affected by it,
Yes.
either being a family member, a friend, a work colleague, or what have you. So 100% of the global population are afflicted or affected. I mean, so it's everybody. So this should be something that everybody is interested in. Almost everybody has a family member. And if they don't realize, that's probably because they just don't know or they haven't connected the dots. But so what do you do? I think the military has a good understanding about how important it is. And I think the key, most highest ranking people are interested in addressing it. And I know like the Secretary of Defense and all those, the big people in the Pentagon, in the military, are addressing it. I think the civilian world, the business world, has a pretty good understanding and are putting a pretty good emphasis. And I'll just give you an example. I just did an interview or a presentation to Bank of America yesterday. So the Bank of America, really interested, got a hold of me, asked me to give a presentation to their workforce. I'm doing MasterCard next week. I talked a couple of months ago to Bank of New York. Um, I'm going to give a talk next week to the International Bipolar Foundation. And so I feel from what I've seen, I think a lot corporate America, business America understands the problem, how important it is, and they're working at it.
Mhm.
In particular, it's really interesting. The construction industry, who has, I believe, the highest suicide rate among any business groups, business sectors, they are really, as an industry, taking this to heart. But how do we make it? How do we elevate it for the whole society? Um, like we talked about at the beginning. I mean, it's insane that our mental health, mental treatment program for people who are acutely mentally ill is to throw them in jail. I mean,
Yes.
that is insane and it's criminal. And
General, this
the
is what I think is just like I'm told that law enforcement, when they pick up somebody that they suspect is having a mental health crisis, they can say to that person, you can either go to jail or you can go to whatever the local mental health facility is. Well, I think that if you have the authority to take that person to jail, you ought to have the authority to take them to the mental health hospital rather than asking a mentally ill person, do they want to go to the mental health hospital? That's insane. But it's feeding into a for-profit prison system where they can get $40 to $60,000 a year to house the mentally ill, and we got to do something about that. This is just not right, and people don't have a voice.
I totally agree with you. You nailed it. In fact, the way you articulate it is about as clear and precise and powerful as I've heard anybody. So you have a real great communication ability and a passion. I would welcome the chance to partner with you and write.
Oh,
Maybe we could get together and write to the congressman from Florida and write to the governor and others and just say, and it's that level. It's probably the state level senators and representatives as well. And really try to get something going in our own communities, in our own state. And then, of course, Senator Manchin, very prominent senator from West Virginia, very, very interested in this, particularly for the military and the veteran community. So Pamela, I would welcome the opportunity to work with you.
well, thank you. I would be honored to work with you on this because, as a former um, regular news broadcaster, I've covered these kinds of things many times. And to know that 95% of African Americans enter into mental health care as a result of violence, and just helping families to understand that we have to, we call it other things. You know, people are drug addicts or alcoholics, and generally, the drugs and the alcohol are only 10% of the problem. There's some mental health issues that need to be addressed. Then my next door neighbor is a psychiatrist, and he said to me, there's only so much medicine can do. And so we don't have enough practice just on basic understanding the mind and mindfulness. How do we have a practice of getting rid of those things that cause? I know that there are chemical imbalances that take place, but there are other things that happen as well. That if we worked on building the strength of the mind as much as we do biceps and six packs, imagine, imagine, imagine what the world would be like. Everybody wants a six pack, but nobody wants to talk about building the mind.
You are totally. I agree with you. In fact, I wrote an article that was in Psychiatric Times about a month or two ago. It's
Uh-huh.
called Four P's of Mental Recovery, and the basic premise is that you know medical help and therapy and physical health are necessary but not sufficient. That you have to
Yes.
anchor it on a social platform, of people, place where you live, purpose, what we talked about earlier. You have to have perseverance to want to keep recovering and getting better and not quit. And then presence, the ability to, kind of get outside of your own mind and look more objectively at what you're thinking and believing. Because a lot of times, if you have some sort of mental condition, the thoughts in your own mind are oftentimes wrong, and so the ability to get outside, and they call it metacognition, fancy word, be able to think about your own thinking. So with that social platform, you can build a recovery that's really made to last.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to us doing this again. I look forward to dialoguing, continuing to dialogue with you. And you are certainly welcome back here at the Wellness Network anytime, because we cannot talk enough about this. Um, I don't know how to do TikTok,
Okay.
but there's got to be a way to reach a generation of people who don't even know the fire that they're walking into, and the fire that they're walking into of already having some issues, and then you add some narcotics on top of it. They don't even realize that they're walking into a burning fire that will destroy them either physically, mentally, and spiritually, end them up in the cemetery or incarcerated. So, again, thank you. I look forward to speaking with you again. And I just want to thank everybody on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube for watching. Please share this conversation with your sphere of influence, and then look for opportunities. There are NAMI organizations across the country, National Association for the Alliance on Mental Illness. There are veteran organizations that you can offer to help. To what can you do? And the only way that we know, we can say we don't know what to do, but we got to ask and then be willing to do the work. So, Army Major General Dr. Gregg Martin, we salute you and we thank you for the work that you are doing, for the courage of you and your family, your wife, in continuing to take this strong stand against mental illness and the stigma associated with it. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
I like that. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for this episode of At the Wellness Network. Thank you. Hope you will go back and watch the whole show and then spring into action. I'm Pamela Marshall at the Wellness Radio TV and at the Wellness Radio TV podcast. Remember, there is healing at the well. Make it a fantastic moment. We'll see you next time.